Now read this.
Hello and welcome back to Now Read This. Lloyd Alexander's The Chronicles of Prydain, Book 2, The Black Cauldron, Chapter 6, Gwistle. Doley hurriedly pushed Eilonwy aside and ducked his head back into the tree trunk. He began shouting again, but the dead wood so muffled the sound that Taran could distinguish nothing of the conversation, which consisted mainly of long outbursts from the dwarf, followed by brief and reluctant answers. At length Doley straightened up and beckoned the others to follow. He set off at a great rate directly across the woodland, and after little more than 100 paces he jumped down on a jutting bank. Taran, leading the dwarf's pony, as well as Melonlas, hastened to join him. Adain, Ellidyr, and the bard turned their mounts rapidly and were soon behind them. The bank was so steeply inclined and overgrown that the horses could barely keep their footing. They stepped delicately among the brambles and exposed rocks. Islamak tossed her mane and whinnied nervously. The bard's mount came near to falling onto her haunches, and even Melonlas snorted a protest against the difficult slope. By the time Taran reached a shelf of level ground, Doley had run to the protected face of the embankment and was fuming impatiently before a huge tangle of thorn bushes. To Taran's amazement, the brambles began to shudder as though being pushed from inside. Then, with much scraping and snapping of twigs, the whole mass opened a crack. "It's a waypost of the fair folk," Eilonwy cried. "I knew they had them every which where, but leave it to good old Doley to find one." As Taran reached the dwarf's side, the portal opened wide enough for him to glimpse a figure behind it. Doley peered inside.
"So it's you, Doley," a sad voice replied. "I wish you'd given me a little warning."
"Warning!" cried the dwarf. "I'll give you more than a warning if you don't open up. Idling will hear of this. What good's a waypost if you can't get into it when you have to? You know the rules. If any of the fair folk are in danger, well, that's what we're in right now. On top of everything else, I could have shouted myself hoarse." He gave a furious kick at the brambles. The figure heaved a long and melancholy sigh, and the portal opened wider. Taran saw a creature which at first glance looked like a bundle of sticks with cobwebs floating at the top. He realized quickly the strange doorkeeper resembled certain of the fair folk he had once seen in Idalig's kingdom, only this individual seemed in a woeful state of disrepair. Unlike Doley, Gwistle was not of the dwarf kindred. Though taller, he was extremely thin. His sparse hair was long and stringy. His nose drooped wearily above his upper lip, which in turn drooped toward his chin in a most mournful expression. Wrinkles puckered his forehead, his eyes blinked anxiously, and he seemed on the verge of bursting into tears. Around his bent shoulders was draped a shabby, grimy robe, which he fingered nervously. He sniffed several times, sighed again, and grudgingly beckoned Doley to enter. Gurgi and Fluda had come up behind Taran. Gwistle, noticing them for the first time, gave a stifled moan.
"Oh, no," he said, "not humans. Another day, perhaps. I'm sorry, Doley, believe me, but not the humans."
"They're with me," snapped the dwarf. "They claim fair folk protection, and I'll see they get it." Fluda's horse, slipping among the branches, whinnied loudly, and at this Gwistle clapped a hand to his forehead.
"Horses," he sobbed. "That's out of the question. Bring in your humans if you must. But not horses, not today. No horses today, Doley. I'm simply not up to horses today. Please, Doley," he moaned. "Don't do this to me. I'm not well, not at all well, really. I couldn't think of it, all the snorting and snapping and big bony heads. Besides, there's no room at all."
"What place is this?" Ellidyr questioned angrily. "Where have you led us, dwarf? My horse does not leave my side. Climb into this rat hole, the rest of you. I shall guard Islamak myself." "We can't leave the horses above ground," Doley told Gwistle, who had already begun to retreat into the passageway. "Find room or make room," he ordered. "That's flat." Sniffing, groaning, shaking his head, Gwistel, with great reluctance, heaved the doorway open to its full width.
"Very well," he sighed. "Bring them all in. And if you know any others, invite them too. It doesn't matter. I only suggested an appeal to your generous heart, Dolly. But I don't care now, it makes no difference."
Taran had begun to think Gwistel had good reason for concern. The portal was barely high enough for the animals to pass through. Only with difficulty did Adain's tall steed enter, and Islamak rolled her eyes frantically as the thorns tore at her flanks. Once past this barrier, however, Taran saw they had entered a kind of gallery, long and low-ceilinged. One side of it was solid earth, the other a dense screen of thorns and branches impossible to see through, but with enough cracks and crevices to admit a little air.
"You can put the horses in there, I suppose,"
sighed Gwistel, fluttering his hands in the direction of the gallery.
"I cleaned it not long ago. I wasn't expecting to have it turned into a stable, but go ahead, it doesn't make any difference."
Choking and sighing to himself, Gwistel then led the companions through a damp-smelling passageway. On one side, Taran noticed an alcove had been hollowed out. It was filled with roots, lichens and mushrooms, the food stock, he guessed, of the melancholy inhabitant. Water dripped from the dirt roof, or run in rivulets down the wall. An odour of loam and dead leaves hung in the corridor. Farther on, the passage opened into a round chamber. Here, a small fire of sod flickered on a tiny ash-laden hearth, and gave out frequent puffs of sharp, nose-tingling smoke. A disorderly pallet of straw lay nearby. There was a broken table, 2 stools, and a vast number of bunches of herbs hung against the wall drying. Some attempt had been made to smooth the sides of the wall itself, but here and there the twisting fingers of roots poked through. Though the chamber was intensely hot and stuffy, Gwistel shuddered and pulled his robe closer about his shoulders. "Very cosy," Fluda remarked, coughing violently. Gurgi hurried to the fireplace, and despite the smoke, flung himself down beside it. Adain, who could barely stand to his full height, seemingly paid no attention to the disorder, but went to Gwistel and bowed courteously.
"We thank you for your hospitality," Adain said. "We have been hard-pressed."
"Hospitality!" snapped Dolly. "We've seen precious little of that. Get along, Gwistel, and fetch something to eat and drink."
"Oh, to be sure," mumbled Gwistel. "If you really want to take the time. When did you say you were leaving?"
Eilonwy gave a cry of delight. "Look, he has a tame crow!" Near the fire, on a tree limb fashioned into a crude perch, crouched a heap of shadows, which Taran realized was indeed a large crow. With Eilonwy, he hurried over to look at it. The crow resembled more a humpy ball with straggling tail feathers, feathers as wispy and disordered as Gwistel's cobwebby hair, but its eyes were sharp and bright, and they peered at Taran critically. With a few dry clicks, the bird polished its beak on the perch and cocked its head. "It's a lovely crow," Eilonwy said, "though I've never seen one with feathers quite like it. They're unusual, but very handsome once you get used to them." Since the crow did not object, Taran gently stirred the feathers around its neck and ran a finger under the bird's sharp and gleaming beak. With sudden sadness, he remembered the fledgling Gwythaint he had befriended, long ago it seemed, and wondered how the bird had fared. The crow, meantime, was enjoying an attention it evidently did not usually receive. It bobbed its head, blinked happily, and attempted to run its beak through Taran's hair. "What's its name?" Eilonwy asked.
"Name?" answered Gwistel. "Oh, his name is Caw, because of the noise he makes, you see. Something like that," he added vaguely.
"Caw!" exclaimed Fluda, who had been watching with interest. "Excellent! How clever! I should never have thought of giving it a name like that." He nodded in pleasure and approval. While Taran smoothed the feathers of the delighted crow, Adain set about examining Elidir's wound. From a small wallet at his belt, he drew out a handful of dried herbs, which he ground into a powder. "What?" said Elidir. Are you a healer as well as a dreamer? If it does not trouble me, why should it trouble you?"
"If you do not choose to take it as a kindness," Adain answered, unperturbed, and continuing to treat the cut, "take it as a precaution. There is hard and dangerous travel before us. I would not have you fall ill and delay us."
"I shall not be the one to delay you," Elodie replied. "I would have stood my ground when the chance was offered. Now we have let ourselves be run to earth like foxes."
Gwistel had been peering anxiously over Adain's shoulder. "Do you have anything that might be useful for my condition?" he asked tremulously. "No, I don't suppose you do. Well, no matter. There's nothing to be done about the dampness and the draughts. No, they'll last longer than I, you can be sure," he added in a dismal voice.
"Stop muttering about the drafts," Dolly ordered brusquely, "and think of some way to get us out of here safely. If you're in charge of a waypost, you're supposed to be ready in emergencies." He turned away furious. "I don't know what idling was thinking of when he put you here."
"I've often wondered that," Gwistel agreed, with a melancholy sigh. "It's much too close to Anuvan for any decent kind of person to knock at your door. I don't mean any of you," he added hurriedly, "but it's bleak. Nothing of interest, really. No, Dolly, I'm afraid there's nothing I can do for you except set you on your way as quickly as possible."
"What about the huntsmen?" Terran put in. "If they're still tracking us—"
"Huntsmen?" Gwistel turned a sickly, greenish white, and his hands trembled. "How on earth did you come across them? I'm sorry to hear that. If I had known before, it might have been possible. Oh, it's too late for that. They'll be all over the place now. No, really, you should have shown a little more consideration."
"You might think we wanted to have them after us," cried Alonwe, unable to curb her impatience. "That's like inviting a bee to come and sting you." At the girl's outburst, Gwistel shriveled up in his robe and looked more dismal than ever. He choked, wiped his forehead with a trembling hand, and let a large tear roll down his nose.
"I didn't mean it that way, my dear child, believe me," Gwistel sniffed. "I just don't see what's to be done about it, if anything at all. You've got yourself into a dreadful predicament. How or why, I'm sure I can't imagine."
"Gwydion had led us to attack Aron," Terran began.
Gwistel hurriedly raised a hand. "Don't tell me," he interrupted with an anxious frown. "Whatever it is, I don't want to hear about it. I'd rather not know. I don't want to be caught up in any of your mad schemes. Gwydion, I'm surprised he, at least, didn't know better. But it's to be expected, I suppose. There's no use complaining."
"Our quest is urgent," said Adain, who had finished binding Elodie's wound and had come to stand near Gwistel. "We ask you to do nothing to endanger yourself. I would not tell you the circumstances that brought us here, but without knowing them, you can't realize how desperately we need your help." "We had come to seize the cauldron from Anuvan," Terran said.
"Cauldron?" murmured Gwistel.
"Yes, the cauldron!" shouted the furious dwarf. "You pale grub, you lightless lightning bug! The cauldron of Aron's cauldron born!"
"Oh, that cauldron," Gwistel answered feebly. "Forgive me, Dolly, I was thinking of something else. When did you say you were going?"
The dwarf seemed on the verge of seizing Gwistel by his robes and shaking him, but Adain stepped forward and quickly explained what had occurred at Dark Gate.
"It's a shame," Gwistel murmured with a sorrowful sigh. "You should never have got mixed up with that thing. It's too late to think about it, I'm afraid. You'll just have to make the best of it. I don't envy you, believe me, I don't. It's one of those unfortunate events."
"But you don't understand," Terran said. "We aren't mixed up with the cauldron. It isn't in Anuvan anymore. Someone has already stolen it."
"Yes," said Gwistel, with a gloomy look at Terran. "Yes, I know."
Hey, you want to buy something? You can check the description for my books and audiobooks. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content.